Welcome back to Intro to Philosophy 1010 Summer 2019 session. Here's our book, An Introduction to World Philosophy. In this video, I'm going over Plato's dialogue, the Theaetetus, and this is for exam 2, and the question I'll be discussing in this video is part B, number 5. In Plato's Theaetetus, why does Socrates reject the definition of knowledge as justified true belief or true opinion combined with reason? So what is knowledge? It's when you have a true opinion and can explain why that opinion is true. Knowledge isn't just a true opinion. You might have an opinion that turns out to be true, but the reasons for your opinion aren't adequate. So for example, in the introductory notes, a jury might find someone guilty, and that person might actually be guilty, but the reasons that the jury thought they were guilty were false. So they have a true opinion, this person's guilty, but the reasons that they found the person to be guilty are false. So they don't have knowledge, they just have an accurate opinion based on faulty knowledge. Therefore, maybe Theaetetus is saying, here's a possible definition that he said I heard someone else say once, and here's what he says on page 339. Theaetetus said, this other person, that true opinion combined with reason was knowledge, but that the opinion that had no reason was out of the sphere of knowledge, and that the things of which there is no rational account are not knowable. So Socrates says, excellent, but then how did he distinguish between things that are and are not knowable? And then Theaetetus says, I don't know, why don't you talk about that, and I'll remember, I think, if you say it adequately. So Socrates says, let me give you then a dream in return for a dream. I thought that I, too, had a dream, and I heard in my dream that the primeval letters or elements out of which you and I and all other things are compounded have no reason or explanation. You can only name them, but no predicate can be either affirmed or denied of them. So here he's going to talk about what is knowledge? Well, learning about the basic elements of things, maybe that's what knowledge is. But the problem is you can't define the basic elements, and he uses the analogy of letters in the alphabet. You can say words and you can explain what they are by breaking them down into syllables. But then when you want to say what the syllables are, you have to break them down into the individual letters. Well, then how do you define each individual letter? You can't. It's just, that's the foundation. And the foundation can't be defined. It's the undefinable foundation upon which definitions are built, or out of which they're built. So therefore, there's the problem. How can knowledge be justified true belief or true opinion with a reason when you can't give a rational account of the fundamental elements of knowledge? So that's, I'll just read here some of what he says. He said, but if the first elements could not be described, but if the first elements could be described and had a definition of their own, they would be spoken of apart from all else. But none of these primeval elements can be defined. They can only be named, for they have nothing but a name, and the things compounded of them, as they are complex, are expressed by a combination of names, for the combination of names is the essence of a definition. Thus then the elements or letters are only objects of perception and can't be defined or known. But the syllables or combinations of them are known and expressed and are apprehended by true opinion. When therefore anyone forms the true opinion of anything without rational explanation, you may say that his mind is truly exercised, but he has no knowledge, for he who can't give and receive a reason for a thing has no knowledge of it. But when he adds rational explanation, then he is perfected in knowledge. So that's what his dream was. Is that what you're trying to say, Theaetetus? And Theaetetus says, precisely. And then they come up, okay, there's a problem with that. That I don't think is going to work. And the main reason is you can't define those fundamental terms. They're self-evident if they're anything. And so while knowledge might very well be possible, you can't define it as a true opinion backed up with a reason, because you can't give a reason for the first principles upon which knowledge is based. So at the left-hand column on page 340, at the very bottom, he says, and is the education of the harp player complete unless he can tell what string answers to a particular note? The notes, as everyone would allow, are the elements or letters of music. Exactly. Then if we argue from the letters and syllables, we know to other simples and compounds will say that the letters or simple elements as a class are much more certainly known than the syllables and much more indispensable. So he's reiterating this main point. We know the letters more than we know the syllables that they create, and we know the syllables more than we know the words that they create, because the letters are fundamental. And yet the letters or the notes, they can't be defined. It is what it is. So he's saying here, how do you define the letter A? The letter A, you could say, well, it's the first letter in the alphabet, but what does A mean? A means A. It means the sound, A, or ah, the short version. It's just a sound without an explanation. And yet we know it more fundamentally, yet it doesn't have a definition other than itself. It is its own definition. How do you spell the letter A? A. So that's defining a term with itself, and that's not giving a rational explanation. So there's the fundamental flaw with defining knowledge as true belief with a reason. So then on the right-hand column on page 340, Socrates says, and there might be given other proofs of this belief if I'm not mistaken, but in looking for them, let's not lose sight of the question before us, which is the meaning of the statement that right opinion with rational definition or explanation is the most perfect form of knowledge. Theaetetus says we must not lose sight of that. Socrates, well, and what is the meaning of the term explanation? I think that we have a choice of three meanings. So he gives three meanings for explanation. The first one is just, in the first place, the meaning may be manifesting one's thought by the voice with verbs and nouns, imaging an opinion in the stream which flows from the lips, as in a mirror or water. So the first explanation is you just describe it with words. Okay, but anyone can describe things, so that's not giving a rational account. So that's not the definition that they're looking for of explanation. So then Socrates says, okay, maybe it's giving the elements of a thing, describing the elements out of which it's made. Maybe that's giving an adequate explanation. And they talk about the example on the left-hand column on page 341, Socrates says, as for example, when Hesiod says that a wagon is made up of 100 planks, now neither you nor I could describe all of them individually, but if anyone asked what a wagon is, we'd be content to answer that a wagon consists of wheels, axle, body, rims, yoke. Certainly, and our opponent will probably laugh at us just as he would if we professed to be grammarians and to give a grammatical account of the name of Theaetetus, and yet could only tell the syllables and not the letters of your name. So an enumeration of the elements out of which anything is composed. Maybe that is the definition of explanation that we're looking for. So what is knowledge? True opinion with an explanation. Okay, how do you define explanation? Well, it can't be just describing a thing, because anyone can describe a thing as if in a mirror. So that's not analyzing it, maybe breaking it down to its fundamental elements. That's a proper explanation. But then you come back to the problem. When you analyze words, you come down to the fundamental elements of letters. Well, how do you give an explanation for the fundamental elements of the fundamental elements themselves? You can't. So that can't be an adequate definition of knowledge either. So then Socrates says that maybe it's distinguishing the differences between things and pointing out what differentiates one thing from everything else that is similar to it. So on the bottom of the right-hand column on page 341, Socrates says, then, my friend, there is such a thing as right opinion united with definition or explanation, which doesn't yet attain to the exactness of knowledge. It would seem so. And what we fancy to be a perfect definition of knowledge is a dream only. But perhaps we better not say so just yet, for were there not three explanations of knowledge? Okay, so he's reviewing over on page 342. Theaetetus, you're quite right. There's still one remaining. The first was the image or expression of the mind in speech. The second, just mentioned, is a way of reaching the whole by an enumeration of the elements. But what's the third definition? There is further the popular notion of telling the mark or sign of difference which distinguishes the thing in question from all others. So he gives an example of how hard that is to do, because when you describe a person, he says, okay, a person, I imagine Theaetetus on the right-hand column on page 342. Socrates says, tell me now, how in that case could I have formed a judgment of you any more than of anyone else? So what is an explanation? Explaining what differentiates one thing from everything else. What is unique about that thing? So then here's what Socrates says. Suppose that I imagine Theaetetus to be a man who has nose, eyes, and mouth, and every other member complete. How would that enable me to distinguish Theaetetus from Theodorus or from some outer barbarian? Theaetetus says, how could it? Socrates goes on to say, or if I had further conceived of you, not only as having nose and eyes, but as having a snub nose and prominent eyes, should I have any more notion of you than of myself and others who resemble me? Certainly not. So surely I can have no conception of Theaetetus until your snub-nosedness has left an impression on my mind different from the snub-nosedness of all others I've seen, and until your other peculiarities have a like distinctness. And so when I meet you tomorrow, the right opinion will be recalled. Most true. The right opinion implies the perception of differences? Clearly. What then shall we say of adding reason or explanation to right opinion, if the meaning is that we should form an opinion of the way in which something differs from another thing? The proposal is ridiculous. All right, so he's rejecting this third one. How so? We are supposed to acquire a right opinion of the differences which distinguish one thing from another when we've already a right opinion of them, and so we go round and round. The revolution of the scyttle or pestle or any other rotary machine in the same circles is as nothing compared with such a requirement. And he says it's like the blind leading the blind. So the third definition of an explanation for something in order to provide knowledge is distinguishing that thing from everything else. What differentiates it from everything else? Well, to understand how a thing differs from everything else, you have to understand what the thing is. But the whole point is to describe what the thing is by showing its differences. So that's the circular reasoning that Socrates is pointing out. How can I know what's unique about a thing until I know what it is? But the whole point of finding out what's unique about it is to discover what it is. So in the end, they leave it off as that they can't find a proper definition of knowledge. On page 343, the right-hand column, Socrates says, but how utterly foolish when we are asking what is knowledge, that the reply should only be right opinion with knowledge of difference or of anything else. And so, Theaetetus, knowledge is neither sensation nor true opinion, nor yet definition and explanation accompanying and added to true opinion. I suppose not. So that's it leaves off without defining what knowledge is. And Plato scholars point out that in this dialogue, Plato never depicts Socrates talking about his theory of the absolute ideas. In other dialogues, that's what knowledge is, being able to relate the many manifestations in the material world of the eternal, spiritual, absolute idea of that thing, the perfect essence of all of the material things and experiences. All of those archetypal forms are the sources of knowledge, and they're all rooted in the idea of the good, which we'll be talking about when we get to Plato's cave allegory. But in this dialogue, he doesn't mention it. So one of the lessons Plato might have been trying to express is that if you don't introduce his theory of the absolute ideas that we saw Leibniz talk about, then you can't have knowledge. So I'll leave it at that. That is exam number 2, part B, question 5 in Plato's Theaetetus. Why does Socrates reject the definition of knowledge as justified true belief or true opinion combined with reason?